Boom! Hello, Twitch world. I'm Marcus B814, officer with AIE. Welcome to our Indy game panel. And I'm sitting here with Nick Iorfino. Did I say that right? I'm
You
terrible
did,
with
yeah.
names. All right, great.
No, that was good.
So Nick and I have known each other for probably a couple of years now, and we met at PAX East, which we'll talk about that in a little while. So tonight's overview, we're going to talk to Nick about what it's like to create an indie game from the ground up and how it even comes to be. So welcome. Thank you so much for doing this panel. And, you know, you've been a guest on Working Class Nerds. We've talked about this stuff before, but
Yeah.
can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what is your background in gaming?
Yeah, so my name is Nick. I am an indie game developer. We'll talk about this a little bit later, but developed a game called Norman's Not In, showcased at PAX and a bunch of other places, one of which is where we met Marcus. Yeah, my background is kind of all over the place, but I mostly focus on art. I do a lot of concept art outside of the games world as well. But yeah, I do art and design for Bactrain games currently.
That's great. And what made you want to do an indie game?
That's a great question. My biggest point of inspiration, which I tell everybody, have you played the game or heard of the game Bastion by Supergiant, the company that just made Hades?
That's like the Castlevania side scroller, right?
Yeah. So Bastion is like their first game as an indie studio. Really good game. Came out in like 2012, I want to say, something like that. Anyway, they launched a game, but with it, they put together this like documentary series with Giant Bomb, where they covered the, I don't know, history of their studio, and like they filmed themselves in their meetings and putting anything together. So I saw that back when I was first job out of college, and I was like, I don't like what I'm doing. I want to do that. So just downloaded Unity, bought Photoshop and started kind of plugging away until we had a solid prototype to get into it. And yeah, many years later, here we are.
And now I'm the developer illiterate. What is Unity?
So Unity is like an engine basically that allows us to create a game with a lot more ease than creating an engine from the ground up. You hear about like Unity, Unreal, Godot. Those are basically tools that developers can use that are a little bit easier access points. So yeah, my background isn't in computer science or programming. So Unity, although it's still very technical and you need to understand that that base, it's a lot easier to access.
So it's not a plug and play and maybe read like a 10 chapter Cliff Notes book and you'll be a pro.
Yeah, and there are plug and play features, like for instance physics. Physics is a notoriously difficult thing to program from scratch, and so we started using their physics engine, but because of as you know what Norman's Not In is, the physics is very much an important part of the game, and we use like a slingshot mechanic that pretty soon after we started didn't quite cut it in Unity because it didn't have the tools we need. So Alex, my partner at Bactrain Games, ended up putting a ton of time into just building up the physics and getting that working well.
Well, just sidebar, Alex was awesome because there were no more tablets available. He gave Nick his own personal phone at PAX, and Nick played the game for another half an hour because of it. I do remember that. But so what is the engine used for Norman's Not In?
So yeah, we use Unity, and yeah, it's super helpful for kind of that ease of access for a lot of the tools. I don't know if we'll continue using Unity. There are pros and cons to every engine out there, but it's been really helpful for us.
Well, everything has limits, right? And
yep.
The I'll give like Star Wars: The Old Republic. That's the game I mainly play. They use something called the Hero Engine, and you can see where they're at the limitations of that engine.
Okay.
Now, as the game has come out and technology has grown through the years, and you can see that it's outdated and it's so limiting on what they can do. So where I can understand that with Unity.
Yeah, and that speaks really to the dedication and like skill of the developers of SWTOR, because they're building tons of content always for like an engine that maybe is outdated in certain ways, and they're still kind of being creative in that tool set.
Sure.
So props to them.
Okay, so can you tell us the story? Because I remember when you told it to us on Working Class Nerds. Oh, before that, somebody in chat asked, does Unity run on iOS and Android?
It does, yeah. So, yeah, Norman's Not In, our first game as a studio, is also available on iOS. There's definitely, it's not plug and play like, okay, port to iOS or Android. There's still quite a number of steps in between, but it does support, it kind of transitions engine over and makes it significantly easier than if you're doing it from scratch.
Sure. So Max is saying that he's playing the game right now on his iPhone. That's awesome.
Yeah, Max.
So, can you tell the story of how you guys came to make this game? Because it's an incredible story, and where it went from day one to today is beyond me.
Yeah, so we first started, we were messing around a lot in Unity, like I was saying, in the early days, back when we both had full-time jobs. And we went to a game jam, basically. It was like a local San Francisco game jam. And we had an idea for a co-op game, one person on mouse, one person on keyboard, and it was co-op on the same computer. And we were thinking of like a platformer might be interesting and kind of quirky and weird. And then we finished the game jam. By far the coolest part was the slingshot, and we're like, we could just make this into the base of a game. And at the time, it was we used bowling balls as the weight that kind of propels you, and
it does propel you.
It does, but at the time we're just like, bowling balls. Yeah, we'll just make them bowling balls. It'll be kind of funny and stupid, and by far the biggest question we get is why bowling ball. And we kind of built a game around that because we just thought it was funny at the start.
All right, so but why a bowling ball?
I mean, like in the game, there's a narrative conceit as to like, well, bowling in this world is a little bit different, and it allows us to kind of poke fun and make jokes at like, I don't know, bowling. But I guess at the start it was just we were having fun with it and decided to run with it.
Awesome. And then, so back to the game jam. So you went to the local game jam and you had this game that you started to create. And how did they receive it at this game jam?
It was interesting. So it was like our first kind of public, I don't know, event where we're showcasing anything. And at the end of the game jam, we basically displayed the game, as did the 15 other game projects, or however many it was. And at one point I was up presenting, Alex was on the keyboard playing the game, and two people from the same team started filming the gameplay, and it was like kind of at that moment that I was like, oh, that's cool. It like resonates enough for a developer, a fellow dev, to like pull out their phone and start recording. So yeah, it was somewhat well received. Like there was interest there, and I think most importantly, Alex and I were interested in developing it further. Like there was a lot more we could do with it. Game jam, you have 48 hours to basically bust out a game, and it was like had the core mechanic, had some ideas of a setting, but like we were able to really flesh it out. And
how much of a game can you actually get done in 48 hours? And do you sleep for 48 hours?
There was little sleep to be had. There definitely was sleep under desks. And you can build enough to get an idea or an understanding of like what mechanic you want to push, or like kind of what things you want to test out with. Like by far the biggest benefit of doing like a game jam is the ability to just iterate. Like you sit down, you have 48 hours, there's like a hard deadline, and it's like, all right, we're just going to make the best thing we can. And like oftentimes vast majority of the games in a game jam are like weird, experimental, and awesome, just because people, yeah, like after the weekend, if you don't like the project, it's 2 days of your life you just don't use the project anymore.
Sure.
So it's a fun way, and it's also community building, where like everybody's in the same boat. So yeah, not much of a game that you can build, but enough to, get a solid idea in the game.
So we have the game jam. You guys didn't sleep. You went to you guys finished the game jam. Where does it go from there?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. We basically just bunkered down and started developing it, slowly replacing what eventually would become all of the code in the game jam game that we made. And yeah, we relatively shortly after we started submitting the game to festivals and trying to just get some more feedback on the game and go into a lot of local playtest night kind of things. And then we started getting a little bit of notoriety. We got accepted to Casual Connect, their Indy Plus section. Met some awesome developers, and what would be one in at the time it was in Seattle.
Okay.
So we flew out, showcase there. That was actually, I think I'm ahead of myself. Before that, we did Google Play Indie Game Festival. That was like the first time where we were out showcasing as like a showcaser, I guess.
Sure.
Yeah, and that was in San Francisco, and we ended up getting a nomination, which is like top, I don't know, 5 or 7 out of like 240 games, and that was a big moment for us, because yeah, we got that award, and I had already been considering pretty heavily quitting my full-time job and going full-time on game dev, so that kind of put things into another gear.
So at this point, you guys are financing the whole thing yourselves.
Yeah, as was the case throughout all of its development, which made things difficult as it does. But yeah.
Wow. Okay, so you go to the Google Play Indie Showcase. You guys are in the top 10. They say then you guys go up to Seattle, and how was the game received there?
So yeah, the difference between the two is Google Play was all kind of enthusiasts, like consumers. The one in Seattle was very much like business, advertising focus. So we get there, and yeah, Google Play was the first like time we were showcasing the game. Seattle was the first time that we were like presenting in front of like business people and people thinking of it as a product instead of like as a fun, entertaining game. So that was really interesting, like just to hear and talk to people whose like sole focus was, okay, how can you monetize this? How will this be received in the market? Whatever, things like that, which eventually helped us kind of put some thought into those kinds of things, because that wasn't really the goal of ours when we started, nor was it the goal when we ended up releasing the game. But it did help kind of get us into a mindset that was a little bit more business oriented.
And how was it received on that side of the coin for you guys?
I think there's a lot more work to be done to satisfy the advertisers. Like we launched it to iOS, as I said, and it's premium, so there are 0 ads, no like extra currency, nothing, no additional things that you buy on. And at the time, and I guess yeah, even more so now, like it's important for getting a mobile game audience with a free game and having in-game purchases or whatever. So yeah, there was a lot of pushback from those kinds of people that like were interested in the game but didn't quite um, think our business decisions were making sense from a monetary perspective. But yeah, we did meet some really great people, great developers from that.
Did they ask you to do things to be able to monetize the game better?
Uh, yeah, I think most of the conversations were like, okay, well, if we were to partner, like our expectations would be that this transitions to more of a in-app purchase kind of a game or whatever. And I think that's probably mainly the reason why we ended up staying fully independent throughout development.
Oh wow.
Because our goal was to make a fun game that was kind of a, I don't know, an extension of our creative self, and not necessarily something that all of our decisions will be made around, whether or not it's going to make money. Yeah, which isn't to say like in-app purchases or free-to-play is like bad. It's just our interests at the time weren't quite ready to tackle that issue.
Sure. And how hard was it to not kind of conform to get a partner who was going to help finance this?
Yeah, that was like part of that is naivete. Like this was our first game as a studio. We were new to the whole aspect of getting that funding. I think a big setback for that too is because this is our first game as a studio. If you're partnering with a publisher or with somebody that will finance the game, they need to feel confident that you as a team can release the game. And yeah, I guess that's a major point. So if you already have a game under your belt, you can go into publisher meetings with a little bit more ground to stand on, because you say, this is the game we produced, this is the number of players, this is how long it took. We can do it again and even better and faster, same team, all of that. But without having that experience, companies were expecting us to kind of conform to their formula a little bit more.
Would you do it this way again?
That's a great question. I think so. It would be very different now because we have that game launched. So I also have, like, at PAX, for instance, where we met. Like,
yeah,
I also met a ton of fellow developers and part of communities that can help with the process of getting funding. But also we have the experience to go into a meeting and say, this is the game we've launched, and that'll help with that process.
Sure. Just shout out to Fezgig in the chat. He said just purchased it on Steam and installing now.
Yeah, thanks, Fezgig.
So now it takes guts to stand up to that. So from that Seattle meeting, how many cons or conventions did you go to in between from that point to launch?
So I don't know. I don't know if I can count. Not that there are a ton, but after that, we did Casual Connect again in LA. We did DreamHack in Georgia, and then PAX East, the first PAX East, where we met you for the Indy showcase, and then PAX West with Indy Mega Booth, and then PAX East again with Indy Mega Booth.
Right.
With a couple local ones in between. So yeah, like, one of the things I'm most thankful for about the game is that it was able to bring us to all these different conventions and kind of I'd never had the experience of going, let alone showcasing in conferences like this. So
sure. Shout out to Albus. He said he just purchased it too. Thanks, Albus.
Thank you.
So I remember when we met. Mm-hmm. At what point in the development was that?
So that was probably
18.
Yeah.
because 19, oh no, maybe 17 or 18.
I think it was 18 because
Yep.
we ended up launching right before PAX West in 2019.
Yes.
So it was, yeah, whatever that breakdown is, maybe a year before launch is when
Okay.
we first met.
And that point to the that Seattle conference, how far is that timeline?
That was back in 2017. So yeah, we had been developing the game for actually, yeah, I think it was January of 2017 that we went to Seattle, something like that. So it had been a while, and the game was quite a bit different. Mainly because yeah, one of the cool things. So I do a lot of art outside of games, and one of the cool things about game development is you make a piece of art, you make levels, you make music, whatever, but nobody sees that unless you're at a conference, but you're not like release it. You don't release it into the world until the game is done and finished. So like you can go back and like iterate and do a bunch of different passes for polish. Whereas like a piece of art, I illustrate it, I put it on social media, my portfolio, whatever it is, and like for all intents and purposes, it's done and it's out. And revisiting that is harder. But with game development, it's nice to have the ability to go back and really polish that stuff up. And actually, like at PAX East 2018 when we first met, that build we had committed to completely revamping the first 5 levels of the game, like 3 months before PAX. So we were like in like the trenches of redoing all of that tutorialization, new art, new assets, new everything. And then we got the acceptance letter from PAX that we were part of their indie showcase, or like a winner of their indie showcase. So we are showcasing the first 5 levels of the game for the first time ever. Like we didn't have playtesters. Like it was
Wow.
Yeah, completely. It was a very nerve-wracking day. I'll say that.
Sure.
But it went off, yeah, super well. And yeah, in part to you and Nick, you guys were freaking awesome.
Well, okay, so we talked about this last night. We did a podcast mashup with Max and Seema from the Escape podcast. It's another guild podcast for the AIE Guild.
Mhm.
And we did a mashup, and Nick kind of told this story that his dad's name is Norman. And
Yeah.
he was walking by, and we wanted to sit down, and we were exhausted from the convention. And he's like, Marcus, I just want to sit down. And then we saw the sign Norman, and we were like, all right, we have to play this game. And I remember it, just like Nick said, we sat down and like 20 minutes went by, and you're like, wait a minute, there's more people that want to play the game. And it's like we were in a zone and gone. And we walked back, and there was a lot of games that we play at those events. And each time we were playing another game, we were comparing it to yours. And it was, maybe it's because it was lighthearted, maybe because it was fun, but it was also challenging. And what took us over the top was it was so easy to learn how to play. As soon as you figured out the whole slingshot, I mean, as you progress, it gets difficult because there's a lot of things that you have to do to make it work. And it's almost like learn as you go, because there's no tutorial really to teach you all those little extra things. And we got sucked in, and I think that first day we came back 2 or 3 times to play it, and it was fantastic.
Well, thank you. Yeah, like I think I've said this story about 100 times, but you've the first time you were playing it, I think we were chatting a little bit before. Nick's dad is named Norman, whatever. You sit down and play it, and then maybe 20, 30 minutes goes by. You stand up from the inflatable balls that we had, and you turn to the PAX audience. You just turn into the aisle and shout, "You need to play this game!"
Yeah.
And everybody walking by was like, "Who's this weird guy yelling at us?"
This guy the size of a bear. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really great. It was a very memorable moment.
And and instantly Nick and I were like, listen, you guys have to come on the podcast. You have to, because we want to help this game develop through. And I remember as the game was getting close, you sent Nick and I like a dev build of the game. And I remember for a couple of weeks, Nick and I were playing it. And what was great about the phone version is you can play it and you beat, like, I call it a sub level, where you beat like a puzzle, and then you can just close the window, and then as soon as you come back, you're right where you left off. And it made it so you could continue to engage in the game, where you never felt like, okay, I have to go back to the 3 puzzles prior to and get to a save point. You can just accomplish one thing.
Yeah, so from like a design perspective, it's a Metroidvania game, so you're playing through getting new abilities, which allows you to backtrack and access new areas. But we knew from the onset that the mechanic would work well for mobile, so we wanted to like release both on Steam and iOS simultaneously. So a lot of effort went into kind of designing levels that would be more mobile play session friendly. Like you can sit down and play 3 hours and get through narrative things and through a ton of levels. But we also wanted to incorporate ways that you could play for 15 minutes, make some progress, and come back. And like always, there are things that, like, if we could go back to the game, we would change or whatever, just based on feedback, how things go. But yeah, that was one of the things that I was pretty proud of from like a design challenge, kind of figuring that out.
And do you find it when you're getting towards the end of the development that you start being super picky in the different I'm going to say the different like details, like, oh, this tree needs to be changed, oh, this needs it, and you really start getting down to the nitty gritty to clean it up?
So I think there are definitely some things that we were for sure picky about. I think a vast majority of them, though, because there was so much content, and because, like, not that there's hundreds of hours or anything, but yeah, it's 6 hour or plus game just for the narrative. So we didn't really have the time or the resources to be all that picky. And like, I think one of the harder challenges of ours was that, like you mentioned earlier, we don't have a formal tutorial. We have, like, the game starts and we want to kind of let the mechanics like kind of do the talking. So you kind of sit there and figure it out for a couple seconds, and then when you do, it like clicks, and you move on, and then you get to another section, and then it clicks. And yeah, so there was a ton of time and iteration put into specifically the first like 5 levels, and then every time there's a new mechanic, like trying to tutorialize it without having words come on the screen and input things. We wanted to try and make that a little bit more seamless, I guess.
Well, I remember there was a part in the game and you had to slingshot yourself and do a double essentially, but you had to hit a rock, and it took me 15 minutes of me figuring out how to get up on the shelf, but you needed to realize that you needed to hit the rock in order to get, like, bounce yourself over. And I said, and I'm like staring at my phone going, okay, I'm not this dumb. What am I missing here? And,
Yeah.
and I would do it again, same thing. And it's rewarding, because landing in lava is not fun for anybody. I don't care whether you're playing Super Mario or Norman's Night In. It's not a fun experience to fall in lava. So you're driven to learn the mechanics, and
Yeah.
that learning curve for me, this mechanic did not come natural to me. So I had to learn it. And I think Alex actually helped me on day one, because I'm like, I don't get what I have to do. He's like, just pull your finger back. Oh my God. And, and then from that point, it just grew. And then you reach your first puzzle where you're like, okay, I can't get that thing up there. I must have to go backwards and go back around, And for me, that's what made the game special, because I've never played anything like this before. So tell us about Bactrain Games and where. So you have Norman's Night and it's released. What it's been out for, what, a year?
Yeah, we crossed 1 year anniversary recently.
Okay, so actually, I think I saw it on Steam that you guys were celebrating the 1 year.
Yeah.
Okay, so where does Bactrain Games go from here?
So that's a great question. We have put a brief hiatus on development, purely monetarily, as much as I hate to say it. So I'm doing freelance concept art, and yeah, basically working with a bunch of indie teams and making a bunch of cool art. But the goal is, as soon as possible, putting full effort back into game development and making the second game. Like the project itself, we learned a ton. Like, as you do starting any project of any sort, like you learn things you didn't know you needed to learn, and then do that 300 more times and you have a game. But yeah, we have a ton of ideas and a ton of like things that I would very much love to dive into.
Shout out to Lily in the chat. Bought it on Steam. We convinced them.
Cool.
Thank you. So would you ever be interested in getting tied to a business that you almost partner with to make a mobile game or just an indie game, and have a little bit of financial backing, but lose some of the control in creation?
Yeah, that's definitely something we've considered. I think we're currently a team of 2. That definitely would give us some opportunities to kind of grow our team, get more skill before like tackling a second larger project. I think, it's not off the table. Like, keeping ears and eyes out. But yeah, I think my current effort is all towards getting better at art, which, like, as a career goal, I get to do more projects, more freelance stuff. But from a game perspective, like, I'm getting better at making art and better at designing games, which I'm excited to kind of then put into a personal project. Once again.
Yeah. And talking about the importance of community, meeting all those people at the PAXs and all of the cons and the other indie developers, would you say that now you would feel more comfortable creating a game as before, because now you have things you can bounce off of other people?
Yeah, I think so. Just Indie Mega Booth, for example, which is due to COVID on a brief hiatus. Hopefully they'll return once in-person conferences start up again. But they've been an incredible resource for it's basically a group of hundreds of like really cool developers who have made really cool games over the years. And purely showcasing with those developers has been really helpful. From like, oh wow, you can do this mechanic, and that's a really interesting way to kind of incorporate whatever it is. And having those conversations is great. But then also having the experience of like showcasing to like what an end consumer would be is also really great, because 1, it lets you play test your game, but 2, it shows you what people's expectations are, especially like on an indie level. People that are perusing the indie game section are looking to find something that's more unique typically. Like, they're not looking for another Call of Duty in the indie section, because Call of Duty does Call of Duty the best. Like, you have people looking to be surprised, and it's been cool to learn that, because for our second game, like, I want to lean into that and do even more unique mechanics and visuals and things like that. But like, also community building, like, you know this firsthand. Like, community is important, and you champion SOTOR, and you're out here like making awesome content with people. As a developer, I super appreciate the work that you do. But everybody also in your community is lucky to have you. So
I really appreciate that. I mean, like yourself, Nick and I one day said, let's start a podcast. And I was 100% in. And where the podcast has taken us, we just celebrated 3 years of the podcast. And then,
congrats, that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you very much. And then this past April, during the pandemic, I always wanted a game stream, and I said, I'm just going to give it a whirl. And it just took off. And you're right about the community, because there's so many people that take the time to message you or talk to you. And I'm the persistent guy that even if I don't talk to you every day, you will always get a message from me, whether it's a Twitter DM, a text message, a phone call. That's just who I am. And if you've impacted my life, like yourself, how many times have I sent you a Twitter message just saying, hey man, how's it going? And it's just to make sure everything is good. And if I can ever help, let's do it. And that's why I was so happy to have you guys on the show. And we hope that, we always hope that it would just help your game grow, So looking into the future, I wanted to get your opinion on, this is outside of your game development. So recently EA, Star Wars has relaunched Lucasfilm Games. I'm sure you've seen that. And so it's interesting to me because it looks like they're going to end the exclusivity rights to EA in 2023, which as an indie game developer, it's interesting for me to hear your answer. Would that be something as an indie developer you'd like to just say, hey, look, I have a really cool indie game idea. It's not going to cost a lot of money. And, a Star Wars slingshot game as an example or something. Does that make you want to come up with an idea and be able to pitch that to or to Disney, as we'll call it, to say, hey, look, I've got a cool idea, and it's going to cost X amount of dollars to do this, and we can retail it for $5.99 or whatever it is, and go from there.
I think so. The one of the awesome things about no longer having exclusive EA rights is EA has made some awesome Star Wars games.
Sure.
But as a massive company, their focus is going to be different than an indie studio or something like that. So for instance, an indie game studio took on the John Wick IP and made an awesome game called Hex. That game came out of nowhere. Nobody expected or wanted that kind of thing, but they landed the pitch and got the IP to make something unique and awesome. So Star Wars has so much depth as a universe that I'm excited. Even if I don't make something to pitch, I'm excited that people outside of we need to make a game that makes this amount of money in this number of months. I'm excited for kind of people being able to pitch different ideas and to really explore Star Wars as a universe in different ways.
Awesome.
But just to briefly answer your question, working on anything Star Wars would be immensely satisfying.
And with your job doing artwork, do you specifically work for somebody, or are you a freelance artist so anybody can hire you for artwork?
So I do freelance concept art, so a lot of game projects, some film, some book, but it's basically anybody can hire me. If it's a project that I find interesting and that my work kind of fits into what they're looking for. Another thing about what makes concept art so fun and indie game dev is I have a bit of ADD. I'm constantly thinking of new ways to do cool things or whatever. The fun thing about freelancing is okay, now I get to work on like historical fiction Philadelphia. This is so outside of like my last project, which was like sci-fi fantasy, like something, yeah. Um, so being able to kind of like dig in and focus on different things is something I'm really enjoying at the time at the moment.
Well, that's great. Uh, Before we wrap up, I just have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Now that the game is been released, do you have to go back in and update it because people find bugs or anything like that, or
Yeah.
or is it pretty set?
So moving forward, it's pretty set. There are, yeah, we did some patching to get rid of some bugs, and having the community help on that was really awesome. I think, yeah, moving forward, um, patches will be much farther and fewer between, just as the game gets a little bit more stable and resources are limited. But we'll see. Like, part of development is like reducing scope, like thinking of a really cool idea and then saying, okay, it doesn't fit in like the current project timeline. Like, we'll make note of it. Like, maybe there's something we could do with it later. So in the future, like revisiting a Norman's Night In or doing a free update or something would be really fun to do. But we're not currently in a place to commit to something like that.
Sure. Well, we hear that a lot from BioWare. That exact answer. Like, look it's in the box. We'd like to do the box, but if it's possible, we'll try to do it. And because there's only so much, there's only so many resources, whether it's an indie game or a AAA title, to be able to do it. Being able to do this and create it from scratch blows my mind. And seeing a game of somebody that I saw at pre-launch, and it's two guys making a game, and this is the game you get, is wild. And what is the requirement from Apple, Android, and Steam to be able to launch the game? Does each one have their own criteria you have to meet? How hard is it to do all that?
Yeah, there are criteria you need to meet, like performance. You have to make sure that, like, for instance, the App Store, you need to have a store page that has all appropriately sized photos, and you need to upload like 40 different icons because they display it in their store, in the featured, in if you link it on a thing. Like, you need specific pixel size. And then the game itself, they all, like, each platform takes different basically languages. Like, you need to translate it from Steam over to Android, and in so doing, that takes work and can sometimes mess up your save state, whatever it is.
What is a save state? I'm sorry.
I am lucky enough to have Alex on my team, who does all of the programming aspect and all of that porting stuff. So I am the wrong person to ask. But yeah, it does make for an interesting, like, once the game is done, okay, now how are we going to port it? Like, what issues are we going to run into? And then troubleshooting from there. It has gotten a lot easier over the years, for especially Steam and iOS. But yeah, there's still hoops to jump through and like make sure that you're adhering to privacy policies of like Europe, things like that. Which,
Okay.
as I mentioned earlier, like, there are a lot of things that you learn along the way that you had no idea existed. A lot of those hoops were things that you didn't know until you needed to. So,
Last question.
Hmm.
Could you give some people some advice if they wanted to start an indie game? How do you start? And what would you give somebody as advice if somebody came up to you and said, "Okay, I want to start an indie game." Go.
Yeah. So, you hear this one a lot. I think my biggest piece of advice is like start small. We started that, and then once we got some traction with the game, decided to increase the scope quite a bit. I think if we were to do this whole process again, we'd make a game stick to 3 months, and like our expectations or your expectations going into it shouldn't be that, okay, your first, your second, your third game, none of those will be hits. You want to make the best thing you can, but along the way you're going to be learning a ton, and each progressive game will be better. So if you start small, 3-month project, release it on Steam, go through the full cycle, but don't expect it to do incredibly well, because the experience you gain will be invaluable. Like Norman's Island took so long to develop; it took us 3.5 years, because we made a small game, decided to make it bigger. In so doing, we basically replaced all of the first, all of the stuff that we already developed, and we basically snowballed it into a much more polished, more sizable game. Which, the game itself turned out a lot better, but our skill would have developed faster as developers if we just committed to releasing it in 2017 and then started another project. That's a big one. And like some ideas you'll be super passionate about and you'll want to take further. But I think if you're just starting out, it's more important to build that skill. You can always revisit an idea, but getting good fast is what your goal should be as a developer.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is awesome.
Yeah, this was a fun conversation. I appreciate you reaching out to me, and
well, you're one of the fam. You're one of the Working Class Nerds fam. You can't imprint yourself on us and not expect, we love you guys, and you guys were awesome to us. And watching, for my own selfish view, is we watched a game that we played at a little booth in PAX East come to this game that is on the platform Steam, that I play all my games on, and seeing and knowing you guys that you did this from the ground level is amazing to me. And I tip my cap, because I couldn't do it, and it makes me passionate about this game, because this game will forever be in my top 10 because I know you guys, and we played this and we watched this game develop to what it is today. And I personally can't wait for the next game. And I kind of hope it's, something awesome. And I hope it comes out sooner rather than later.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I feel very similarly. I can't wait to make our next game. And and what I was saying just a moment ago about like developing that skill, that's something that I've learned probably the most with making art. After launching the game, I've made a ton of art, and my focus was getting better. And that's also something that I'll apply to my next game. Like I'm excited to kind of put everything we've learned and start with something fresh and hopefully something that'll become cool.
The AIE Guild in chat said, "We really appreciate you taking the time, Nick. This con idea was a fun side experiment for our community, and having an actual gaming pro spend time with us is amazing. So thank you." So Nick, thanks again.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.